Excellent. So, hello, everybody. Welcome. Happy to have you today. My name is Allison LaFerlita. I am the Executive Director of the Nonprofit Resource Hub. For those of you that are new, we are an organization that provides support and services to the nonprofit sector. We offer amazing webinars like you are going to experience today, as well as a number of resources through our website that you can access. As a nonprofit, it is free of charge to join the Nonprofit Resource Hub. And for that, you will be updated as to what we're doing, what's going on. You won't have to find it on a social media post or search for it or hear about it through a friend. We have members like David who are vetted and approved by the Nonprofit Resource Hub Board of Directors who are here to support you. They really understand the sector, which is incredibly important. And they are here to make sure that you are able to do the good work that you do. So if you are not yet a member, I do ask that you please go ahead and join. Go to nonprofitresourcehub.org and join. It takes 2 minutes. It's free of charge, and you will have access to all of these amazing opportunities and resources. So that said, I'd like to welcome all of you today to David's webinar, Is Your Nonprofit Prepared for Leadership Transitions? As we all know, the sector landscape right now is sort of all over the place and uncertain. And what perfect timing. David is to show you how you can be prepared for them and how your organization can start to talk about that if it's even a year or two out. It's important to really have those conversations now while you're not in panic mode. So with that, I am going to introduce you to David Harris. Welcome, David, from Interim Executive Solutions.
Well, thank you so much, Allison. It's really a privilege to be here. This is great to be part of the Nonprofit Resource Hub. This is an organization that I think does great work for organizations around New York and beyond, and we're thrilled to be a part of it. Thank you all for making time to join us today. I do hope if you have questions, you put them in the chat, and Allison will accumulate those and ask them at the end. But if there's something burning, feel free to say, I'd like this question answered now, if it's really relevant to what we're talking about at the time. With that said, let's get started. Who am I? Well, my name's David. I put David C. Harris because if you try to find a David Harris on LinkedIn, you'll find so many of them that it will be buried somewhere. But there are only a couple of David C. Harrises, and I really would love to connect with you on LinkedIn if you choose to do so. I am managing partner of Interim Executive Solutions. We're a partnership focused really on nonprofit sustainability at what is often a vulnerable time, transitions. We have been in this field for the last 12 years. Across the country, we have over 200 professionals, people who have successfully run nonprofits or at a stage of their careers where they're not looking to run another organization long term, but really can come in as a business leader to strengthen the nonprofits during a transition and prepare it for its next leader and ensure that that person has a great foundation to be able to build on. Just sort of setting the landscape that we're all working with. There are challenges that all of you face, obviously. Funding is a constant challenge, but in this, over the last year or so, it's not got any easier, that's for sure. Resources are always limited, and so figuring out the best use of resources becomes a priority. I think the hybrid workplace has become a real point of challenge for many organizations. How do we find the right balance of in-person and remote? How do we create equity for organizations where some people have no choice but to be in person and others potentially could have a choice? How do we ensure, despite all of the distractions, we maintain focus on the mission, the core of why we're here and what we're trying to do? How does board engagement and support manifest itself in our organization? Quite frankly, as we'll talk about later, the Partnership between board and staff is essential to a high-functioning nonprofit. And what do we do about the inevitable burnout that many people feel with all the pressures, as well as planned retirements that are, in many cases, long overdue? And finally, uncertainty in general. No matter how much we plan, there's always things that happen that force some adaptation. Many of these things do create a situation where turnover can happen at all levels within an organization. And so, sort of, let's briefly, before we dive into this, talk about the impact that leadership turnover can have on the staff and on the board. From a staff perspective, there's always personal uncertainty when leadership changes. What's this going to mean for the culture of our organization? How does it reflect in terms of job security? And if I thought I had growth opportunities, does this create more opportunity for growth or potentially stymie some of the opportunities that I thought might be in front of them? Staff also have questions about the programs. Um, is this going to change our organizational priorities? Are we still going to get the same support from funders? Maybe we'll get more support. Who knows? But what's that going to mean? And what does it mean for individual roles and responsibilities? Are those going to shift as a result of a change in leadership? On a broader scale, staff always worry about the overall organizational uncertainty. Are the vision and values that brought me to this organization still going to hold? And is the organization sustainable? So those are in the minds of every staff member in one way or another at a time of a transition. The board also has a lot of new things to think about at a time of transition. First of all, many boards are, sort of casually engaged with the work of an organization. They've been letting the ED sort of do what the ED does. They show up at board meetings, hear nice things about the organization. Uh, and all of a sudden, when there's a leadership transition, there's an increased need for engagement. They've got to pay attention to the hiring process, to contracts, to supporting the staff who might have all of the questions that we just described. They've obviously got to initiate a search process, and oftentimes when we talk to board members who are experiencing leadership transitions, they're feeling like they're getting sucked into day-to-day work that they really hadn't anticipated, especially board leaders. But it's also a time of organizational uncertainty for them. What's this going to mean for our financial sustainability? Should we be actually now thinking about the vision for the organization moving forward and whether that's the same as we've had, or maybe it's an actual opportunity to be able to re-envision where we want to go? What about the relationships that have been developed? What relationships might be lost? What relationships could potentially be gained? So ultimately, we find that in times of transition, boards, the boundaries of governance and management sort of tend to get a little bit blurred. Um, and I think all of that ends up meaning more time for people who are already really busy. But these are decisions, these are issues that need to be addressed at this time because they're foundational for the future of the organization. Before diving into transitions, though, I want to talk a little bit about the importance of resilience. Resilience is the ability to withstand or recover quickly from difficult situations. Transitions are one example of those, but they're not the only example of those. But what resilience does is it provides a basis for smoothing those transitions. And I should preface this, even though our particular business is all about stepping into organizations that are going through leadership transitions and helping make sure that that transition ends up in a much better place for the organization. I truly believe that if an organization has some of these elements of resilience that we're about to talk about, that transitions can happen much smoother, and the need for professional interim leaders to step in and help an organization through that process is much less. And that's what I wish for the for our community as a whole. So I'm briefly going to talk about what I think of as the five pillars of resilience. These are the foundational pieces that enable an organization to be ready for anything, including leadership transitions. And we'll talk about these in more detail, but adequate funding and reliable funding, adaptable operations, internal controls, talent management and accountability, and ultimately crisis management protocols are sort of the foundations on which organizations can build resilience. And they're things to be thinking about on an ongoing basis, not just when a transition is on the horizon or when a crisis hits. So let's dive into these a little bit. Adequate funding. Well, the first piece to that is to ensure that there are multiple points of connections to the funders and supporters of an organization. So there's no sort of single point of failure, if you will, in ensuring the continuity of the funding streams that you have. A way to make that happen is to ensure that funders are kept informed uh, of what the organization is doing at all times, not just at a time when you're reaching out to ask for support. Um, and also using that outreach to know their priorities and to help align their priorities with the work of the organization. Ultimately, what we're talking about here is building the connection from the funders to the mission of the organization, because that is something that is sustainable and can persist beyond transitions, whereas individual relationships could be a lot harder to sustain. A way to ensure that is meticulous data management, where that's thinking about stewardship and continuously uh, maintaining and enhancing that relationship is front and center, not just for maybe the ED or key board members, but for everybody in the organization who has any kind of interaction with people who are supporting the organization. The other side is to keep focus on cash projections. Um, I think that oftentimes we look at where we are today, but we're not thinking about where we're going to be tomorrow. And if we don't plan 3, 6 months out about where things look like they're going to be, we don't have enough time to be responsive and ensure that we have backfilled any shortfalls we might have or adjusted our operations or whatever it might be to ensure sustainability. If you can build up a reserve, so much the better. Putting aside a little bit of in a rainy day fund allows for being able to handle any kind of slowdown in payments or other kinds of things that might occur. Not everybody has the luxury of doing that, but it's something that every nonprofit should be conscious of and trying to do in order not to ever get to a panic mode. So that's sort of the funding side of this. Let's talk about adaptable operations. Um, the first piece to that is really ensuring that the work that's being done is connected to the overall mission. Sometimes people don't feel like the work that they're doing is connected to in a meaningful way to the mission, but every person in a nonprofit plays an important role in the ultimate achievement of the mission. A great place to know, though, whether the work that's being done is translating into the impact that you desire is to solicit input from the frontline staff. How is this work? How are these policies? How are the processes that we're putting in place impacting the ability to actually deliver services uh, the to the clients that are being benefited by your organization? Fostering teamwork and collaboration allows you to adapt to changing workloads and changing stresses. Being able to cross-train people so that they can fill gaps is a really valuable way of ensuring adaptability because inevitably there will be gaps. There will be places where the stress is high on some people and other people have capacity. And we'll come back to cross-training later because what it also does is allow for professional growth opportunities for team members. But this idea that we're working together and one person's challenge is in some ways all of our challenges is a way to foster adaptability that gets the work done without burning people out. On a higher level, though, regular strategic planning lets you think about where are we today, but where do we need to be tomorrow? Reassessing the landscape that you're in, because quite frankly, these days, many nonprofits sort of cross barriers, what might have been barriers in the past between each other. Certainly in COVID, everybody jumped in to do everything for their clients, even if other organizations potentially could have done that. We've backed off that, but there's still a lot of places where multiple organizations are offering similar uh, capabilities. So reassessing the landscape and figuring out where do we really differentiate ourselves? Where can we really make a difference? And then adapting plans to that new information enables you to make sure your organization has got the kind of impact and value that will continue to both meet the needs of your client base and attract the support from your funder base. And then making sure that these are living, breathing plans so that annual goals and even less than, shorter than annual goals are tied to the broader plan. And everybody, therefore, is working towards the same ultimate goals. Internal controls. We don't often pay enough attention to the actual policies, procedures, how things are done. A lot of it is in individual people's heads. And, out of necessity, we've sort of shifted around who's doing what, but nobody's really documenting it. It is essential to have documentation. And the documentation can be as simple as if people are doing processes that they can record through a Zoom meeting of themselves doing something or talking it through so that it is known. At least that's a starting point. It's not as good as having sort of more formalized procedures, but it's especially important for knowing the flow of funds, who manages what, who touches what kind of uh, aspects of the financial flow. Oftentimes you have a single point of a single person who's sort of managing most of the financial details of the organization, and therefore there's no visibility into that. So understanding the flow of funds, the HR practices, formalizing how you recruit, what your criteria are, the things that help you to make sure you are being equitable in your procedures and getting the best possible candidates. Um, Making sure that the board has the opportunity to periodically review policies because oftentimes you have great expertise on the board that can give you some perspective about hiring or financial controls and what have you. Tap into that expertise by sharing what your policies and procedures are and getting feedback on them. And then making sure that whatever you put in place, people know about and the staff is trained on. Oftentimes, there are policies, but nobody knows about them. There's an employee handbook, but people aren't really required to read it and know it thoroughly. Same thing for a board handbook, for instance. So that's a piece of control that really enables an organization to smoothly flow from one situation to the next and address challenges that might require some adjustment to some of those procedures. The other piece of controls is the underlying systems. Is all the data that is relevant coming together in one place so that you have the ability to get a holistic picture of how the organization is functioning? Um, a big piece of this is to ensure that, when you're making new decisions about funding sources, programs, you're thinking about the implications across the whole organization. So if we bring in a new program, do we have the funding for it? How's it going to affect our overall financial picture? Or if we have a funder interested in doing something, how does that affect our overall program costs and the jobs that the people are being asked to do? So tying these things together, collaborating across the different aspects that make the organization run is critical for being adaptable, being resilient. I'll often think of our work as being built on a three-legged stool: finance, development, and human resources people. And having those coordinate versus being separate silos is essential to any resilient nonprofit. Perhaps the biggest element of resilience is talent management and accountability. Our work is nearly all service oriented, and service by definition is all about people. So being able to attract, develop, and maintain staff is foundational to our ability to deliver on our mission. Having clear roles and responsibilities, that can be challenging when it's a small organization with lots to do. But still, if there's a lot of overlap and too many people touching too many things, it puts stress on the whole system and reduces accountability. So having clear roles and responsibilities is really, really important. Having collaborative teams that make sure that all perspectives are brought to the table for the decisions that are made. But then once a decision is made, that everybody walks away with clarity about where we're going and why we're going there and what we're going to do about it. We talked earlier about cross-training. Cross-training, yes, allows you to smooth out a lot of the edges that we encounter inevitably by having limited resources, but cross-training also gives people professional growth opportunities. And many, and I won't say all, because there are absolutely people who come to a nonprofit and come to any job saying, just tell me what to do. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do that. And that's just leave me alone. I'll do it. There are people like that, but more and more people want to grow. They want to learn. They want to be energized by new opportunities and to give people exposure to other aspects of an organization, even if there's no job there for them right now, is an opportunity for them to say, you know what, this organization cares about me and I care about it. So that is really a valuable thing all the way around. And it also creates a foundation as we'll see in a moment, for succession. Um, Perhaps the simplest of things that we overlook as when it comes to talent management is appreciation. And compensation's one thing, but appreciation goes a long way. And when organizations get stressed, they tend to forget to appreciate those things that people are doing to try to mitigate some of that stress and try to help the organization thrive. And then having regular systems for communication and feedback. If you do not have a way of documenting what people are doing well, or what people are expected to do, or what people are struggling with and need to do better, it becomes really difficult to get the best out of your talent. So and that includes, by the way, the board providing regular feedback to the executive director about what they're seeing and how they can help that person grow and develop in their role. These things, in many ways, lead to succession planning. Succession planning and succession planning at the end of the day is proactively preparing the staff to advance within an organization when openings occur. And it's not just at the top, it's all throughout the organization. If there's a focus on building people's capacity and developing people's capabilities, then it creates the opportunity to adapt to inevitably the turnover that may happen just as a result of people actually, wanting to find new growth paths for themselves. So when we think about succession planning, we think about first and foremost understanding our work, understanding the work that needs to be done in order to advance our mission, and then translating that understanding into roles and responsibilities for the team that we have. And if you understand those things, then if there's a need to fill a gap, not only do you know who's capable of doing it, but you also then know how to shift other resources around to fill in behind that. So a purposeful people development system, professional development system, is an underlying element of any succession planning. Investing in staff so that not only are they good at their job as it is today and supported in that work, but they're prepared to take on new roles. It's much, much easier to grow from within if you have a talent pool ready for that than it is to go outside and have somebody learn your culture, learn your organization, learn the nuances that allow you to be great at what you as an organization do. And then establishing processes to be followed during transitions. Because one thing that every staff member looks at is equity. If there's an opportunity, and it's an opportunity that I should have at least be considered for, am I getting that consideration? So having those clear processes in place to ensure that people feel good about how they're being treated is really important to do. If you have done those things, then it ensures continuity of operations when departures occur because you have people who can step in. You don't have to miss a beat, or at least you know where the gaps are and you know exactly what you're looking for to fill those gaps. Secondly, it does provide an opportunity to revisit position descriptions, qualifications, etc. Because as you move people around to ensure continuity of operations, it does give you the ability to leverage people's strengths and succession planning by knowing what people are capable of and what they're interested in, um, allows you to know the strengths you want to leverage in the team that you have. It also increases the likelihood of smooth knowledge transfer. We talked about the importance of documenting policies and procedures, but to the degree maybe that hasn't been done as much as it should. Having people knowledgeable through their interactions with others and their ability to be cross-trained or shadow folks gives you a way to ensure that critical knowledge is not lost at a time of somebody leaving your organization. And I think, to my mind, it sets up your culture as one where people talk the talk and walk the walk. Um, if there's an investment in the staff, that comes back in terms of ease of hiring because people say, well, this is a great place to work. You know, they care about you, they give you feedback, they want you to do well, et cetera, et cetera. Often forgotten in my mind is how critical the board is to be thinking about succession planning. Um, the board's support for leadership is, I think, what allows them to make good decisions during transitions, but also to ensure that on an ongoing basis, the staff is doing the things that are going to sustain the organization. So, where does that start? Well, it really starts with open, honest communications. I see too many situations where sort of the board is either too laid back, just sort of trusting that things are being done, but not really asking a lot of questions, or they're too involved and they're trying to be too directive. Having an open uh, communication. Here's what's working. Here's what we're doing about it. Here's, if you're a board member, what we're thinking and what we have questions about. Creating that sense of partnership uh, is really valuable for the foundations of creating a long-term success within the organization. Being available and accessible to problem solve. There's invariably challenges that as an executive director they're facing that they really do need the expertise of the board to help them think through. So having the board view themselves as a partner to the work of the staff, as well as recognizing they have some oversight responsibility, enables you to fully tap into the uh, strength that the board brings, but also makes the board more engaged and makes them more invested in the success of the organization. And I truly believe that while you want decisions to all go through the executive director, getting to know other staff members and getting them to know what the board is doing and thinking about builds trust in a way that can be extremely valuable. Some of that happens through committees and committees with staff representation on them. Some of that happens through showing up at events and having casual conversations. Um, what you don't want to do is bypass leadership, but you do want to get a real sense for what is actually working and where there are opportunities to strengthen. Obviously, boards have a governance role, a responsibility uh, to oversee policies and the way that the organization works. And they have a responsibility to ensure adequate resources and to regularly review finances. But they also need to know what the key metrics of success for the organization are. And as part of any kind of annual planning, not just setting goals, but setting ways to measure progress towards those goals. and any key factors that could get in the way of success are ways that boards can be helpful to the staff and can help them recognize when there's an opportunity to maybe respond to some of the challenges that may be happening. We're talking a lot about leadership transitions at staff, but it's equally important that boards think about leadership transitions on the board. Pra Pragmatically, board leadership is demanding, but yet it is critical. Board leaders are orchestrating meetings, they're engaging board members, they're supporting the ED when issues arise, they're participating in fundraising, and if they're not, they should be, and they're providing both the governance oversight and the fiscal oversight. That's a lot to ask. Some board leaders relish it, some board leaders take it on reluctantly. In an ideal world, you want to have a strong board staff partnership that it involves full engagement without it being overly time consuming and emotionally draining. So I really believe that effective boards think of their own succession plan. And a model that's often used is that when somebody comes on a board, they firstly have an opportunity to join a committee. They have an opportunity to rise to lead a committee. They may step onto an executive committee role of a secretary or a treasurer or a vice chair, and ultimately take a stint as a board chair. I think the most effective, or one of the most effective models for board leadership is a co-chair model with overlapping terms. So maybe 2-year terms, and each year one person rolls off and one person rolls on, because that way you have some continuity in terms of the way things work, the relationship with the ED, so that you're not having wild pendulum swings as one board leader has one style and another board leader has a different style. But you're getting fresh ideas and fresh energy constantly brought to the board leadership so that they can be true partners, valuable partners with the ED. The last issue of resilience is crisis management protocols, making sure that the board brings complementary skills that the staff may not have. So, marketing expertise, legal expertise, financial expertise. And if they don't have it directly on the board, have it in your Rolodex. Know who to turn to for these things that can be really valuable to support the work of the staff. Having backup plans. You know, D&O insurance is really there just to allow boards to do their work without fear that somehow that work can come back on them. And if you're doing work in the right way in service of the organization and the mission, there's no problem. Having protocols for handling surprises. Who's involved? Who talks to whom? And who are the outside resources that we tap into if there is a challenge? PR folks, legal advisors, HR experts are all key people to have to bring to the table when they're needed. And then how does the board and staff together work through any kind of crises? And the biggest part of it is often communication. Who communicates what to whom, and how do you agree on what that communication should look like? I think where I see most challenges in nonprofits is where there's inadequate communication. So people just don't know what they should know, or they therefore assume things that might be incorrect. Effective communication then not just is between board and staff, but it reaches out to your funders and all key stakeholders. Uh, No information is always an opportunity for people to make assumptions that could be very incorrect. So let's talk about assigning, excuse me, let's talk about affecting a smooth transition. Having a transition team that typically involves board and staff and can look at the elements of resilience that we talked about um, is is the first step to effect a smooth transition. And ask yourself the question, what are we doing well? What are we not doing well? What could we do better? Secondly, reviewing the succession plans. What talent do we have? Where don't we have talent? Where are our vulnerabilities? Next, revisiting the organization's priorities and values. Are we still on the same path? Maybe we need to think a little bit differently. Um, a great example, is that the ED of the or the dean of the Harvard Business School, after having 10 years of very, very great success, stepped down because he said, you know what, the vision for the organization needs to change and I'm not the one to do it. So making sure at a time of transition, you're thinking about where the organization really wants to go or should be going, and using that as a measure of do we have the talent we need to do that? And then being willing to act thoughtfully but decisively, making sure all stakeholders are informed how you're thinking about these transitions, um, and how you maintain trust that their connection to your organization will persist. Why do new leaders often fail in a transition? The first one really is poor communication with the staff and stakeholders. People don't know why the person was chosen, what they're there to do, where the organization's going. So the better the communication throughout the entire process, the better people are set up for success. Sometimes leaders have operational expertise, or maybe they have program knowledge, or maybe they're great fundraisers, but they don't embody all three. And if the organization doesn't have the complementary skills already in place, then there are gaps that end up being quite costly. If one is not really clear on what we do well and what we don't do well, or where some of the challenges are, and those were not well communicated ahead of time, leaders often step into situations and find that there's all kinds of things that either the board didn't know or the board didn't tell them, or that, quite frankly, people hadn't really paid attention to, that they then have to fix, if you will. And it's really hard as a new leader to come into an organization, have to fix things, and then live with the consequences of those fixes. Another challenge is unrealistic expectations. Oh, we're bringing somebody in and it's going to be a game changer as far as our programming or our fundraising or what have you. Hard for individual people to have that much impact without the organization being behind them and being having the elements it takes to make those changes. And really, what this comes down to is the things we just talked about in resilience were not in place. And when they're not in place, it makes it really hard for new leaders to step into an organization and thrive. So, a quick word about sort of interim leadership. Again, I truly believe that in an ideal world, if one is resilient, the need for interim leadership from the outside is significantly reduced. But when those pieces are not in place, there is a profession of interim leadership, interim leaders that come in to stabilize operations and culture, making sure the right people are in the right place, doing the right things, making sure the communications are robust and that everybody feels connected to the work of the organization and is aware of how some of the things that need to be done are being done. Interim leaders also really assess strengths of an organization if they haven't already been assessed and address gaps. They look to put in place reliable systems to provide and processes so that everybody is working off good information, board, staff, stakeholders, etc. And they look at the skill sets in the organization and therefore what a new leader is going to need to bring to complement those skills that are already in the organization. And also to provide whatever foundation is needed to achieve the vision that may have been sort of reflected on during this transition. And finally, sort of preparing for the long-term hire. Interim leaders are there to really establish a high-functioning, sustainable foundation for a new leader to build on. So they don't have to come in and start messing around with a lot of things. They can come in and learn what's working and then bring the team together to move the organization forward. And in the process, really ensuring that both the board and the staff are prepared for the success of the organization. Oftentimes, we talked about boards being critical in this process, helping them see how they can maybe reorganize and what questions they're going to be thinking about in the future to support a new leader can be very valuable for that new leader's success. Finally, a couple of myths versus reality. People wonder whether interim leaders are just placeholders. They say, well, why don't I just promote somebody from within to sit in the leadership seat if it's a time-related issue? And they wonder if it's too expensive to bring in an outside resource to help an organization through a transition. In reality, uh, interims actively move the mission forward and strengthen operations. They show this time and time again that an organization ends up in a much clearer place about where they are, where they're going, and that actually then helps you bring in the right leader to step in and continue that work. As far as promoting somebody internally, acting leaders are going to basically keep the train running, but aren't going to objectively look at the organization and say, are we as good as we should be? Is this organization as sustainable as it needs to be? Do I have the experience from other nonprofits to see what a high functioning organization looks like? That's what outside leaders can bring. And finally, on a cost basis, most of the time you'll find that an interim lead from the outside is no more expensive than the current ED or the future ED you already had was. So it's not a matter of cost, it's a matter of willingness to use this time productively. So finally, you know, questions to ask yourself as to whether your organization is ready for succession or whether it perhaps needs to think about an outside professional interim is, are you ready for a smooth leadership transition based on the issues of resilience? So clear mission that is compelling to funders, reliable and resilient infrastructure, as we talked about, knowing what skills you have and know what skills you need, having clear complementary governance, board, and staff roles, and having processes for navigating transitions. If you have questions about that, on our website, we actually have a quiz that will let you know whether your organization's ready should transitions be in your future, whether it's a long-time leader leaving or a situation where the organization is not functioning as well as it needs to. That's the time to ask these questions. So I think I've left a few minutes for questions. I did see there were some things in the chat, and hopefully Um, Allison, you can bring some of those questions up and I'm
Sure.
happy to answer
Happy
them.
to. Thank you so much, David. Well, our first question was, can you please speak to transitions from founding executive directors to a new next ED and best practices you have seen that make those transitions successful?
Great question. Founders are a special breed. Getting an organization off the ground often means putting an organization on your back and carrying it and figuring out everything that needs to be done. And then over time, as an organization grows, hopefully you bring some people in behind you. But the one guarantee is when a founder is ready to leave, nobody is going to be like that founder. They're not going to be, nobody's going to have all the knowledge they have, all the skills they have, but also the organization actually often needs something quite different for the next 10, 15 years of its life than it needed for the first 10 or 15 years. So, founders, the biggest challenge is recognizing that what they built hopefully is an organization that has a meaningful mission that is impacting people in a really positive way. And it's not about how they did it, but it's about how the organization can continue to do it. And so uh, uh, following a founder is a great time to consider these questions about, is the infrastructure solid? Do we have the right people in the right place? What is the vision for the next 10 or 15 years? All the questions that we just asked around resilience. What I do find is that boards will often go out and they'll do a search and they'll find somebody who steps in and encounters many of the things that we just talked about in terms of why leaders fail. And the average tenure of somebody following a founder then ends up being about 17 months. They become unintentional interims because the organization hadn't really prepared itself in the ways that we talked about. So we strongly believe that founders are a great time to look outside and think about a professional who can come in and do that assessment and figure out how to ensure that all the great work the founder did is going to live on for a long time through the organization.
Thank you. Next question for you. I think I have three more questions total. Can you please speak to a feeling among some nonprofit leaders that their organizations are too small to have a number of staff who can move into larger roles?
Great question, and certainly true. And part of it is that you may not be able to have people who can move all the way into a high role, but being clear on what those people are doing and how they're working together so that when a new leader comes in, that leader can actually learn from and build on what the staff is doing, as opposed to having to come in and all of a sudden sort of fill a lot of gaps, um, at least allows for the staff to be valued, the staff to make sure that their contributions are being continued, even if they are not the leader in that role. So I think this is where the board being clear on who's doing what to whom, and therefore where the gaps are that they need to find a new leader to fill becomes really important.
Thank you. Next question. Under what circumstances should a board prioritize hiring an interim ED versus moving straight to a permanent search?
Well, I think we talked about a little bit. One is following a long-time leader. It's a really hard thing to do because invariably there are things that just that person's innately doing that nobody really has a handle on, and they're not exposed in a way that allow boards to make good choices about who to hire next. And the other is the elements of resilience. Is the organization functioning in a way that's going to attract and retain a great leader? Is your story one that is going to bring in the best possible leader for the future? Or is it a situation where it's like, I'm not going to really tell them everything because then they may not want the job? That to my mind is a great indicator that maybe an interim can help set the table for the future.
Thank you. Last question. Aside from financial reports, what are the most invisible pieces of institutional knowledge, like key donor nuances or community relationships, that an executive director transitioning out of the organization should start documenting now?
Yeah, well, relationships are a huge piece of it. Knowing, not just relationships with funders, but key partners, organizations that are enabling the work that you're doing and supporting the work you're doing. That tends to be a place that knowledge ends up being in one person's head as opposed to spread. So bringing other people into those relationships is really valuable, but also establishing the questions that you as a leader think about in knowing whether you feel like your organization is running well. Things that may not have anybody you can talk to about. But having those conversations at a minimum with the board chair, saying these are the things that keep me up at night, is going to better prepare an organization to not have gaps of knowledge when a key person leaves.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, we are at the cutoff point. So, David, I want to thank you so much for your time, sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with us. And for those of you that have joined us, if you have additional questions for David or you'd like to book some time with him, his information is here on the screen. If for some reason you lose it and you need us to connect you with him, we're happy to do so. Once again, on behalf of everybody at the Nonprofit Resource Hub, I want to thank all of you for coming. David, I want to thank you for sharing your time with us. And if you are in the process of looking for an interim ED or starting to plan for a retirement, you know you can always reach out to David. So thank you very much. And I hope you all have a great day.